Welcome to Night Whisper Tales, where the stories never sleep. Every night, a new voice calls from the dark, waiting for you to listen. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe before the next tale finds you. I was 28 when I took the position at Garrison Point Lighthouse. My marriage had just ended, my father had died 6 months prior, and I needed somewhere to disappear for a while. The job posting said, solitary work, minimal human contact, room and board included. It sounded perfect. The lighthouse sat on a rocky promontory jutting into the Atlantic, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that flooded twice daily with the tide. You had a 4-hour window morning and evening to come and go. Miss it, and you were stuck until the next low tide. The Coast Guard liaison who hired me, a weathered man named Doherty, made sure I understood that part. He also mentioned that the previous keeper had left abruptly after only 3 weeks, but he waved it off as not being cut out for the isolation. I should have asked more questions. The lighthouse itself was a sturdy brick cylinder painted white, with a keeper's cottage attached at the base. The cottage was small but well maintained, a bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a rust-stained tub, and a sitting room with a wood stove. The walls were thick enough that you couldn't hear the wind unless it was really howling. A metal staircase spiraled up the lighthouse interior to the lamp room at the top. My job was simple: maintain the automated light, keep a weather log, report any ships in distress, and make sure nothing fell into disrepair. The first week was exactly what I needed. I fell into a routine quickly. Mornings, I'd climb the stairs to check the light mechanism and clean the lens. The view from up there was incredible, nothing but gray-green ocean stretching to the horizon, seabirds wheeling in the updrafts, the occasional fishing boat passing in the distance. Afternoons, I'd work on small repairs around the cottage or read the stack of paperbacks the previous keeper had left behind. Evenings, I'd write in the official log, then in my personal journal, trying to work through everything that had happened in the past year. I was lonely, yes, but it was the kind of loneliness I wanted. The kind where you could hear yourself think. On the 8th night, I woke to the sound of knocking. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and measured, coming from the cottage door. I checked my watch, 2:47 a.m. The tide was high, I could hear the waves crashing against the causeway. No one could have reached the lighthouse. I lay there, heart pounding, waiting. The knocking came again. Same rhythm. 3 beats, perfectly spaced. I forced myself out of bed and crept to the sitting room window. The exterior floodlight illuminated the rocky ground around the cottage. Nothing moved. The door was clearly visible from where I stood. No one was there. The knocking came a 3rd time, and I realized with a chill that it wasn't coming from the door at all. It was coming from inside the lighthouse, somewhere up the spiral stairs. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight Doherty had left me and approached the door to the lighthouse interior. The metal was cold under my palm. I told myself it was the wind, some loose panel banging in the draft. But the sound had been too deliberate, too rhythmic. I didn't open the door that night. The next morning, I climbed the stairs in full daylight, checking every surface, every panel, every possible source of the noise. Everything was secure. No loose fittings, no gaps where wind could create sound. I told myself I'd dreamed it. The isolation was getting to me faster than I'd expected. But that night, it happened again. Same time, 2:47 a.m. Same pattern, 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. This time, I was determined to find the source. I opened the lighthouse door and started climbing, flashlight beam bouncing off the curved brick walls. The knocking stopped the moment I started ascending. I climbed all the way to the lamp room anyway, my breath echoing in the enclosed space. The automated light swept its beam across the dark water, regular as a heartbeat. Everything looked exactly as it should. I stood there for 10 minutes, waiting, but the sound didn't return. Over the next week, it became a nightly occurrence. Always at 2:47 a.m. Always the same pattern. I tried everything, staying awake to catch it, recording the sound on my phone, climbing the stairs the moment it started. Nothing worked. The sound seemed to exist in a space just beyond my ability to pin it down. I started dreading nightfall. On day 16, I found the previous keeper's journal. It had fallen behind the bookshelf in the sitting room, wedged into the gap between the shelf and the wall. I only discovered it when I was moving furniture to mop the floor. The journal was water-damaged and moldy, but most of the entries were legible. I should have stopped reading after the first page. The handwriting was shaky, degrading with each entry. But I couldn't look away. Day 3, beautiful here. Peaceful. Finally feel like I can breathe. Day 5, heard something last night. Probably just the building settling. Day 7, it's knocking. 3 times. Always 3 times. I checked everywhere. Nothing. Day 9, can't sleep. Waiting for it. 2:47 like clockwork. Day 11, climbed the stairs. Felt like something was climbing behind me. Couldn't see anything when I turned around. Day 13, there's something wrong with the water. Looks darker than it should. Day 15, found footprints. Wet footprints. Leading from the door to the stairs. But it hasn't rained. Day 17, I hear it breathing. Not knocking anymore. Just breathing. Right outside my bedroom door. Day 19, going to leave. Tide be damned. I'll swim if I have to. The final entry was barely legible, the letters sprawling and frantic. Don't trust the tide times. They're wrong. It wants you here when the water's high. My hands were shaking as I closed the journal. I looked at the tide chart Doherty had given me, mounted on the wall by the door. Low tide should have been at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., like clockwork. Safe passage twice a day. But when I checked my phone's weather app, the times were different. Low tide was actually at 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. I'd been trapped here during every low tide for over 2 weeks. That night, I didn't wait for the knocking. At 2:30 a.m., I packed a bag with essentials and made my way to the door. I'd walk the causeway, tide or no tide. Even if I had to wade through knee-deep water, I was leaving. The door wouldn't open. I pulled, I pushed, I threw my shoulder against it. The lock turned freely, but the door itself wouldn't budge, as if something on the other side was pressing against it. Through the window, I could see the causeway. It was completely dry. Low tide, just like my phone had said. At 2:47, the knocking started. But this time, it was coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. A cacophony of 3-beat rhythms overlapping and echoing until I couldn't think. I covered my ears and sank to the floor. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. Wet footsteps. Slow and deliberate, coming down the spiral stairs from the lamp room. Step. 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 Each one accompanied by the sound of water dripping onto metal. I backed into the corner of the sitting room, flashlight clutched in my shaking hands. The door to the lighthouse interior was closed, but I could see water seeping underneath it, spreading across the floor in a dark puddle. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door. "Let me in," a voice said. It was my voice. My exact voice, but wrong somehow. The inflection was off, like someone mimicking speech without understanding its meaning. I didn't answer. I couldn't have even if I wanted to. My throat had closed up completely. "Let me in," it said again. "I'm so cold out here." The door handle started to turn. I don't remember making the decision to move. My body just reacted. I ran to the bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved the dresser in front of it. Then I climbed out the window onto the rocky ground outside. The floodlight showed me the causeway, still dry and passable. I ran. I didn't look back. My feet slipped on the wet rocks, and I fell twice, scraping my hands raw, but I kept going. Behind me, I heard the cottage door open. Heard footsteps on stone. Heard my own voice calling after me. Come back. You belong here. I reached the mainland just as the sun was starting to rise. I collapsed on the gravel parking area where I'd left my car, gasping and shaking. When I finally looked back at the lighthouse, I saw a figure standing in the lamp room window. Too far away to make out details, but I knew it was watching me. I drove to the Coast Guard station and found Doherty. I told him I was quitting, effective immediately. I didn't tell him why. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound insane? He looked at me with something like pity. The last keeper said the same thing. And the one before that. We have trouble keeping anyone there longer than 3 weeks. Why didn't you warn me? I asked. Would you have believed me? He had a point. I learned later, through some research at the local historical society, that Garrison Point Lighthouse was built in 1887 on the site of a previous lighthouse that had collapsed during a storm. The keeper of that earlier lighthouse, a man named Samuel Garrison, had been trapped in the lamp room when the structure failed. His body was never recovered. They built the new lighthouse directly over the ruins of the old one. The historical records also showed something else. Samuel Garrison's pocket watch, found washed up on shore weeks after the collapse, had stopped at exactly 2:47. I've tried to move on. I found a new job, a new apartment, started seeing a therapist. But some nights, when I wake in the dark, I hear it. 3 knocks, measured and deliberate, coming from somewhere I can never quite locate. And I know that whatever I left behind at Garrison Point is still waiting, still calling, still trying to find its way back to me. I never wanted to work in the university's special collections department. I was a modern literature person, 20th century and later, the more contemporary the better. But when the graduate assistant position opened up in my second year, I was desperate. My funding had been cut, my roommate had just moved out, and I needed the stipend. So I swallowed my pride and applied. Dr. Marianne Voss, the head archivist, was a severe woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. During my interview, she studied me over her reading glasses and asked one question: how do you feel about spending time alone with old things? I told her I was fine with it. She nodded slowly, made a note in her leather-bound planner, and told me I could start the following Monday. The special collections occupied the entire 4th floor of Bancroft Library, the oldest building on campus. To reach it, you had to take a freight elevator that groaned and shuddered with every floor. The 4th floor itself was a maze of narrow aisles lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, all climate-controlled and kept at a constant 65 degrees. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, and there were no windows. Dr. Voss's office was at the far end, behind a heavy oak door she kept locked even when she was inside. My duties were simple: cataloging new acquisitions, creating finding aids, handling requests from researchers, and maintaining the environmental controls. Most days, I'd see Dr. Voss for maybe 30 minutes during her morning rounds. The rest of the time, I was alone with thousands of boxes of papers, rare books, and artifacts donated by alumni, local families, and various estates. It was during my 3rd week that I first encountered the Blackwood collection. I was processing a new acquisition in the back corner of the archives, working my way through a box of letters from a local suffragist, when I noticed a section of shelving I'd never seen before. It was tucked behind a rolling map cabinet, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The shelves held maybe 20 boxes, all identical, gray archival storage boxes with no labels or identifying marks. I pulled one down and opened it. Inside were journals, dozens of them, leather-bound and handwritten, dating from the 1920s through the 1950s. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, and the entries were strange. Not diary entries or personal reflections, but detailed descriptions of dreams. March 15, 1923, subject reports recurring dream of a doorway. Stone arch, no door, opening onto darkness. Subject feels compelled to enter but wakes before crossing threshold. Reports feeling of profound loss upon waking. March 22, 1923, subject dreams of doorway again. This time, hears voice calling from beyond. Cannot make out words but feels they are important. Subject attempts to cross threshold but is held back by unseen force. March 29, 1923, subject crosses threshold. Describes space beyond as neither here nor there. Encounters figure, details unclear in subject's recollection. Figure touches subject's forehead. Subject wakes with splitting headache that lasts 3 days. I flipped through the pages, fascinated despite myself. Each entry followed the same clinical format, documenting someone's dreams over years. Hundreds of entries, all describing variations of the same dream, the doorway, the voice, the figure beyond. At the back of the journal, I found a note in different handwriting. The final entry, dated October 12, 1957, was barely legible. Project terminated. University has sealed all materials. I tried to close the door, but I don't think it worked. They still dream. I still dream. We should never have opened it in the first place. If anyone finds these records, destroy them. Don't read them. Don't think about the doorway. Don't. The sentence ended there, trailing off into a legible scrawl. I closed the journal with shaking hands. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just old research from a time when ethics review boards didn't exist. Disturbing, yes, but nothing supernatural. That night, I dreamed of a doorway. Stone arch, no door, opening onto darkness. I stood before it, feeling a pull I couldn't resist. From beyond the threshold, a voice called to me. I couldn't make out the words, but I understood their meaning. Come through. Cross over. This is where you belong. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. It was 3:17 a.m. I lay there in the dark, heart racing, telling myself it was just the power of suggestion. I'd read about the doorway dream, so my subconscious had incorporated it. Nothing more. But the dream came again the next night. And the night after that. Each time, I got a little closer to crossing the threshold. Each time, the voice became a little clearer. By the end of the week, I was barely sleeping. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my hands shook when I tried to work. Dr. Voss noticed, of course. She pulled me aside after one of her morning rounds. "You've been reading the Blackwood materials," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, too exhausted to deny it. She sighed heavily and sat down at one of the reading room tables, gesturing for me to join her. I should have restricted that section. I thought the warning note would be enough. You knew about it? I was the one who processed the collection when I first started here in 1982. I read some of it. Not all, I had more sense than that. But enough. She removed her glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from her pocket. The dreams started for me too. Took 3 months before they stopped. 3 months? My voice cracked. It gets better. The pull weakens over time. But you have to resist. Don't cross the threshold. No matter how strongly you feel compelled, don't cross it. What happens if I do? Dr. Voss put her glasses back on and looked at me with something like pity. Dr. Blackwood crossed it. On October 12, 1957, campus security found him in his office. He'd barricaded the door from the inside. The windows were locked. But he was gone. They never found a body, never found any explanation for how he could have left the room. I felt cold all over. You think he actually went through? Through the dream doorway? I think he believed it was real. And sometimes, belief is enough. She stood up. Take a few days off. Get some rest. Don't think about it. And for God's sake, don't read any more of those journals. I tried to follow her advice. I took the rest of the week off, stayed with a friend, tried to distract myself with other things. But the dreams continued. Every night, the doorway. Every night, the voice calling me closer. And every night, I found it harder to resist. On the 7th night, I crossed the threshold. The space beyond wasn't darkness, exactly. It was an absence of light, but also an absence of space, time, dimension. I existed there, but I couldn't feel my body. I was awareness without form, suspended in a void that felt both infinitely vast and claustrophobically small. The voice was clear now. Not words, exactly, but meaning that bypassed language entirely. You've been here before. You'll be here again. This is the place between sleeping and waking, between existing and not existing. Dr. Blackwood thought he created us, but we created him. We reached through his experiments and pulled him here. Now we've pulled you. I tried to scream, to wake myself up, but I had no mouth, no lungs. I tried to run, but I had no legs. I was trapped in the void, consciousness without anchor. Don't struggle. It only makes it worse. You can leave, but you'll come back. Everyone who crosses the threshold comes back eventually. Dr. Blackwood is here. All his subjects are here. You'll see them in time that I woke up in my bed, sheets tangled around me, dawn light filtering through the curtains. I was shaking so violently I could barely stand. I called in sick to work, then called again the next day, and the next. Dr. Voss didn't ask questions when I finally returned. She just looked at me, saw something in my face, and nodded sadly. That was 3 years ago. I still work in special collections. I finished my degree, got hired full-time when another position opened up. Dr. Voss retired last year, and I'm being considered for her position. I'm good at my job. Reliable. Thorough. But every night, I dream of the doorway. And every night, I cross the threshold. I've learned not to fight it. Struggling only makes the experience longer, more intense. Now I just let myself drift in that void, listening to the voices of all the others who've crossed over. Dr. Blackwood is there, still trying to close the door he opened. His subjects are there, trapped in the space they were never meant to enter. And new people arrive all the time, researchers who found his papers in other archives, curious souls who stumbled across references to his work online, students who checked out the wrong book from the wrong library. The doorway is always open. And once you know it exists, once you truly understand what it is, you can never really leave it behind. Sometimes, on quiet days in the archives, I'll catch myself staring at a blank wall, seeing the doorway superimposed over reality. Sometimes I wonder if I'm actually standing in the archives at all, or if I'm still in that void, dreaming that I wake up each morning, dreaming that I go to work, dreaming that my life continues. I sealed the Blackwood collection in a locked cabinet. Put a warning label on it. Restricted access to authorized personnel only. But I know it won't matter. Someone will find it. Someone always does. The doorway wants to be found. And late at night, when the library is closed and I'm alone on the 4th floor, I can hear them through the walls, all the other dreamers, all the other crossed thresholds, all the other voices calling from the space between. They sound like they're getting closer. I inherited my grandmother's house in rural Maine when I was 31. I'd only visited twice as a child. She and my father had a falling out when I was young, and they never really reconciled. When her lawyer called to tell me she'd left me the property, I was surprised. We'd barely known each other. The house sat on 40 acres of pine forest, accessed by a dirt road that branched off a county highway. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. The nearest town, a place called Wickford Mills, was 15 miles in the other direction. It was about as isolated as you could get without requiring a helicopter. I drove up in late September, planning to spend a week assessing the property before deciding whether to sell. The real estate agent I'd consulted had been honest: rural Maine isn't exactly a hot market. You'll get something for the land, but don't expect a fortune. I wasn't expecting a fortune. I was expecting closure, maybe. Some connection to a grandmother I'd never really known, some understanding of why my father had cut her out of his life so completely. The house was smaller than I remembered, a single-story Cape Cod with weathered shingles and a sagging front porch. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. The yard had gone to seed, tall grass and weeds pressing up against the foundation. A detached garage leaned precariously to one side, its door hanging from one hinge. I unlocked the front door with the key the lawyer had sent and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and the musty smell of a house long closed up. Furniture sat under white sheets like ghosts. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet. In the living room, I found a stack of photo albums on a side table. I sat on the sheet-covered couch and flipped through them. Pictures of my father as a child, smiling and gap-toothed. Pictures of my grandmother, young and serious. Pictures of a man I assumed was my grandfather, though I'd never met him. He'd died before I was born. There were also pictures of the property. The house when it was new, the paint bright and the yard neatly maintained. The forest in different seasons. And one photo that made me pause, a picture of a stone wall running through the woods, old and moss-covered, disappearing into the trees. On the back of the photo, in my grandmother's handwriting, property line. Do not cross after dark. I found that odd. Why would it matter what time you crossed your own property line? I spent the afternoon exploring the house. The rooms were tidy, if dusty. My grandmother's belongings were neatly organized, clothes in the closet, dishes in the cabinets, books on the shelves. It was as if she'd simply stepped out one day and never come back. In the bedroom, I found a journal in the nightstand drawer. The entries were sporadic, sometimes months apart, spanning the last 30 years of her life. Most were mundane observations about the weather, the garden, small repairs needed on the house. But scattered throughout were stranger entries. June 14, 1987, heard them again last night. Closer than before. Checked the line this morning. Still intact. September 3, 1990, the stone that marked the northwest corner has been moved. Put it back. Reinforced with iron stakes. December 20, 1995, Michael called today. Told him not to bring his family here. He got angry, as I knew he would. But he doesn't understand. Better he thinks I'm a cruel old woman than risk them crossing the line. Michael was my father. I felt a chill as I read that entry. Is that why they'd had a falling out? Because she'd told him to stay away? March 8, 2003, replaced the chain at the north boundary. The old one had been broken. Don't know what broke it. Don't want to know. October 17, 2010, I'm getting too old for this. Won't be able to maintain it much longer. Worry about what happens when I'm gone. The journal ended there, 3 years before she died. I sat on the bed, holding the worn leather book, feeling a growing sense of unease. What was she maintaining? What was she keeping on the other side of the property line? I decided to walk the boundary before it got dark. I wanted to see this stone wall, understand what had consumed so much of her attention. The journal entries had included rough coordinates, and I used my phone's GPS to navigate through the woods. The wall was exactly as the photo had shown it, old fieldstone, maybe 3 feet high, running in a relatively straight line through the forest. Moss and lichen covered most of the stones. Small trees had grown up through gaps, their roots displacing some of the stones. But overall, the wall was intact. As I followed it, I found the reinforcements my grandmother had mentioned. Iron stakes driven into the ground at regular intervals. Chains looped between them, rusty but still strong. And at several points along the wall, she'd attached small objects, horseshoes, iron nails bent into symbols I didn't recognize, strips of red cloth tied to branches. Folk magic. Protections. Against what? I walked the entire northern boundary, finding my grandmother's markers and repairs everywhere. By the time I made it back to the house, the sun was setting, and I remembered her warning, do not cross after dark. That night, I heard them. At first, I thought it was wind in the trees. But the sound was too regular, too rhythmic. Footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, walking through the forest just beyond the property line. They moved from west to east, slow and steady, never varying their pace. I went to the window and peered out. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the tree line, but I couldn't see anything moving. Just shadows and trunks and the dark mass of the forest. The footsteps continued for hours. Around midnight, they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear a new sound, branches breaking, something scratching against the outside wall of the house, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the floor. In the morning, I went outside to check. Deep furrows had been gouged into the ground just on the other side of the stone wall, as if something heavy had been dragged along the property line. The furrows ran for about 50 feet, then stopped abruptly. I should have left right then. Should have packed my car and driven back to Boston and never looked back. But I was stubborn. And despite everything, I didn't believe in ghosts or monsters or whatever my grandmother had been protecting against. There had to be a rational explanation. I spent that day researching the property's history at the Wickford Mills Public Library. The records were sparse, but I found a few relevant documents. The land had been in my family since the 1890s. My great-great-grandfather had built the original house on the site. There were some old newspaper clippings from that era, mentions of problems with vagrants and trespassers in the area, warnings from the sheriff's office to stay away from certain parcels of land. One article from 1897 caught my attention. 3 missing after venture into Wickford Woods. Authorities search for men last seen near contested property boundary. 3 men from Portland remain missing after an expedition into the Wickford Woods last week. The men, identified as James Harkness, Thomas Pike, and William Corrigan,